poor girl helped a rich man on a cold, unforgiving night. But she had no idea who he was. And by the time she found out, her life was already changing in ways she could never undo. She was just a poor girl, tired, hungry, invisible to the world, while he was a rich man, broken, bleeding, and hiding behind silence. Their worlds were never meant to collide, but fate forced her to choose: walk away like everyone else, or help a stranger who looked like trouble. She chose to help him. But why was a rich man alone in such danger? What was he running from? And what would happen when the truth about who he really was finally caught up with her? Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. It gives me the strength and encouragement to keep writing. Beautiful stories. Rain fell like needles against the cracked pavement, the kind that soaked through clothes and settled into bones. Ava Brooks pulled her thin jacket tighter around herself as she hurried down the dimly lit street, her worn sneakers splashing through shallow puddles. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting long, uneven shadows that made every corner feel unsafe. She hated this part of the city at night. Too quiet in some places, too loud in others. Too many stories of people who went missing or got caught up in things they didn't understand. But Ava didn't have the luxury of avoiding dangerous streets. Not when rent was due. Not when her younger brother Noah needed food on the table. Her shift at the diner had run late again. Another night of forced smiles, rude customers, and tips that barely covered bus fare. She had counted her earnings 3 times already, hoping the amount would magically increase. It never did. Ava turned a corner, her breath visible in the cold air, when something caught her attention. A car. It sat crookedly by the roadside, one tire slightly off the curb. Its engine was off, but the headlights were still on, cutting through the rain like silent witnesses. It didn't belong here. Not in this forgotten part of the city where broken things came to be abandoned. She slowed her steps. Something felt wrong. Her instincts told her to keep walking. Mind your business. That was the rule here, the only way to survive. But then she saw him. A man slumped near the car, barely visible through the rain. At first, she thought he might be drunk. That wouldn't be unusual. But as lightning flashed briefly across the sky, it illuminated something that made her stomach drop. Blood. Her heart started pounding. "Hey!" she called out, her voice shaky despite herself. Are you okay?" No response. Ava hesitated. Every warning she had ever heard echoed in her mind. This could be a trap. People set up situations like this. Lure someone in, then... The man moved slightly. A low groan escaped his lips. That was enough. Against her better judgment, Ava stepped closer. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the ground itself was trying to hold her back. When she reached him, she could see him clearly now. He wasn't what she expected. Even in this state, soaked, injured, barely conscious, there was something about him that didn't match this place. His clothes, though torn, were expensive. His watch alone probably cost more than everything she owned combined. His face, though pale, carried a kind of sharp, commanding presence that didn't belong to someone who got left bleeding in the rain. This wasn't just any man. This was someone important. "Hey, stay with me," Ava said, kneeling beside him despite the water soaking into her jeans. "Can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered open for a split second. Dark, intense, and filled with something she couldn't quite place. Fear? No. Not fear. Urgency. "Don't," he muttered weakly. "Don't call anyone." Ava frowned. "What? You're hurt. You need help." He tried to grab her wrist, but his strength failed him halfway. No police. That made her pause. No police? Her heart skipped. Who was this man? She looked around nervously, half expecting someone to jump out of the shadows. But the street remained empty, the rain masking all other sounds. Listen, she said, her voice firmer now. You're bleeding. I can't just leave you here. His eyes met hers again, and this time there was something deeper in them, something that made her chest tighten unexpectedly. Please, he whispered. Ava swallowed hard. This was a mistake. She knew it. Every instinct screamed at her to walk away, to pretend she hadn't seen anything. This was bigger than her, more dangerous than anything she could handle. But then she thought of Noah, of how many nights they had gone to bed hungry, of how the world had ignored them over and over again. She looked back at the man. Someone had done this to him. Someone had left him here. And for a brief moment, she saw herself in him. Not the wealth, not the power, but the abandonment. The way the world could turn its back on you when you needed it most. Ava exhaled slowly. Okay, she said, almost to herself. Okay, I'm going to help you. She slid her arm under his shoulder, struggling slightly under his weight. He was heavier than he looked, his body weak but still solid. This is a bad idea, she muttered, half laughing nervously. A really bad idea. But she didn't stop. Step by step, she guided him away from the car, away from the open street. Her apartment wasn't far, just a few blocks down, in a building that had seen better days. If anyone asked, she would say she didn't know him. If anything went wrong, she didn't let herself finish that thought. As they moved, the man's head leaned slightly against her shoulder. His breathing was uneven, shallow. Stay with me, she said again, her voice softer now. You're gonna be okay. But deep down, a question gnawed at her. Who was he really? And why did it feel like helping him might change everything? Ava pushed open the door to her apartment with her shoulder, nearly losing balance as the man's weight leaned heavily against her. The hallway smelled faintly of damp wood and something older, like time itself had settled into the walls. The flickering bulb above her door buzzed weakly, threatening to go out at any moment. Almost there. Just hold on, she whispered, though she wasn't sure if he could even hear her anymore. Her hands were shaking now, not just from the cold, but from the reality of what she had done. She had brought a complete stranger, a wounded, possibly dangerous stranger, into her home. The door creaked open, revealing a small, cramped apartment. A worn couch sat against one wall, its fabric slightly torn at the edges. A tiny kitchen area barely separated by a counter held a few dishes stacked neatly. Everything was modest, but clean. It was all Ava had managed to build after years of struggling. Stay quiet, she muttered, more to herself than to him. With one final effort, she guided him toward the couch and gently lowered him down. He groaned in pain as his body made contact, his face tightening briefly before going still again. Ava stepped back, breathing heavily as she tried to steady herself. What now? Her eyes darted toward the door, as if expecting someone to come crashing in at any second. But the apartment remained silent. Too silent. She turned back to the man. Up close, the details were even more unsettling. The blood wasn't just from one place. It had soaked through parts of his shirt near his side, darker and heavier there. His hands had faint bruises, like he had fought someone or something. And then there was his face. Even unconscious, there was a presence about him. A kind of authority that didn't disappear just because he was hurt. The kind of presence that made people listen or fear. "Who are you?" Ava whispered. No answer. She swallowed and forced herself into action. Okay, think," she said under her breath, pacing briefly before stopping. "First, stop the bleeding." She rushed to the small cabinet near the sink and pulled out what little she had. A basic first aid kit, half-used bandages, and a small bottle of antiseptic. It wasn't much, but it was all she could afford. Returning to the couch, she hesitated for a second. Helping him meant getting closer, seeing more, getting involved in something she didn't understand. But she had already crossed that line. Carefully, she began to work. She peeled back the soaked fabric from his side, her hands trembling as she revealed the wound beneath. It wasn't a simple cut. It was deeper. "God," she whispered, her stomach tightening. He needed a hospital. Anyone would know that. But his voice echoed in her mind. "Don't call anyone." Ava clenched her jaw. "Why?" she muttered. "Why would you say that?" Her mind raced with possibilities, trouble, crime, enemies. Nothing about this situation felt normal. Still, she couldn't stop now. She cleaned the wound as best as she could, her movements slow and careful. He flinched slightly, a soft groan escaping his lips, but he didn't wake. "Sorry, I know it hurts," she said quietly. As she worked, something slipped from inside his jacket and fell onto the floor with a soft thud. Ava froze. For a moment, she just stared at it. Then slowly, she reached down and picked it up. A wallet, her breath caught. This was it. This could tell her who he was. Her fingers hovered for a second before opening it. Inside, everything looked expensive. Sleek cards, perfectly arranged. And then, she saw the name, Alexander Kane. Ava blinked. The name hit her like a distant echo, familiar, but she couldn't place it immediately. She had heard it before, somewhere. Maybe on the news, or from customers at the diner. Her eyes widened slightly as realization began to creep in. Kane? As in Kane Industries? Her heart started pounding again, faster this time. "No, that's not possible," she whispered. She looked back at the man on her couch, Chukin Alexander Kane, a rich man. Not just rich, powerful. The kind of man whose name carried weight. The kind of man who didn't just end up bleeding in the street unless something very serious had happened. Ava's grip on the wallet tightened. What did I just get myself into? As if in response, the man shifted slightly, his eyes opening just a fraction. They locked onto hers. This time there was no confusion in them, only intensity. "You." His voice was weak but clearer now. "You shouldn't have brought me here." Ava's breath caught. "You're awake." He tried to push himself up, but pain forced him back down immediately. His jaw clenched as he fought through it. "Listen to me," he said, his voice strained but urgent. "If anyone finds me here, you'll be in danger." Ava felt a chill run down her spine. "Danger from who?" she asked quickly. But instead of answering, his eyes shifted toward the door, as if expecting something or someone. "You need to forget you ever saw me," he said. "Walk away while you still can." Ava shook her head almost immediately. "No, I already made my choice. I'm not leaving you like this." For a moment, something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe even disbelief. "You don't understand," he started. A sudden sound cut him off, a faint noise from outside, a car door slamming. Both of them froze. Ava's heart dropped. Alexander's eyes darkened instantly. "They're here," he whispered. Ava's pulse roared in her ears. "They?" she echoed, her voice barely audible. Another sound followed. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, getting closer. Alexander looked at her, all weakness gone from his gaze, replaced by something sharp and commanding. "Turn off the lights," he said quietly. "Now." Ava didn't hesitate. She rushed to the switch and flicked it off, plunging the apartment into darkness, the only light now coming faintly from the street outside. The footsteps stopped right outside her door. Silence. Heavy. Terrifying. Ava held her breath. Her mind screamed at her to run, to hide, to do anything, but her body refused to move. Then, a knock, slow, controlled, not the kind you ignore. Ava's chest tightened. Alexander's voice came again, barely above a whisper. "Don't open it." The knock came again, louder this time. "Miss, we know you're in there." Ava's eyes widened in the darkness. How did they know? Her gaze slowly shifted back to Alexander. The rich man. The stranger she had helped. The man she didn't know. Not really. And now, whoever was on the other side of that door was looking for him. Ava's heart pounded so hard it felt like it might give her away. The knock came again, sharper this time, more impatient. "Miss, open the door." She stood frozen in the darkness, her back pressed lightly against the wall, her eyes locked on the faint outline of Alexander Kane on the couch. The room felt smaller now, like the walls were closing in on her. Alexander didn't move, but his voice cut through the silence in a low whisper. "Stay quiet." Another knock, louder. "We don't want any trouble," the voice outside said, calm, too calm. "We're just looking for someone." Ava swallowed hard. Looking for someone. Her mind raced. Should she pretend she wasn't home? But they already knew she was inside. Should she answer and lie? Could she even pull that off? Her thoughts flashed to Noah. If anything happened to her, what would happen to him? "Ava," Alexander whispered. It was the first time he said her name. Her eyes snapped to him. "How do you—" "I saw your mail by the door," he murmured quickly. "Listen to me. If they come in, don't try to protect me. You don't owe me anything." Ava's jaw tightened. "You think I'd just hand you over?" she whispered back, a mix of fear and defiance rising in her chest. "You don't understand who you're dealing with," he said, his voice sharper now despite the pain. "These aren't people you can reason with." Another knock. This time, it rattled the door slightly. "Last chance!" the voice called out. Ava flinched. Her gaze darted around the apartment, searching for anything. A hiding place, a weapon, a plan. There was nothing, just her, a poor girl, and a rich man who brought danger to her door. Her breathing slowed slightly as something shifted inside her, fear turning into resolve. She leaned closer to Alexander. "Can you move?" He gave a faint, almost humorless exhale. "Not fast enough." "Then we don't have a choice," she whispered. Before he could respond, Ava turned and walked toward the door. "Ava," he started, but she shook her head. "I'm not letting them break in," she said softly. "That'll be worse." She reached the door, her hand hovering over the handle. For a split second, everything inside her screamed to stop. But she didn't. She unlocked it. Slowly, carefully. She pulled the door open. Two men stood outside. Tall, broad, dressed in dark jackets that blended into the night. Their faces were calm, but their eyes, cold, calculating, immediately swept over her, then past her, scanning the apartment behind her. "Evening," one of them said smoothly, offering a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Sorry to bother you this late." Ava forced her expression to stay neutral. "What do you want?" "We're looking for someone," the man replied. "A man who may have come through this area." Ava leaned slightly against the doorframe, subtly blocking their view. "I haven't seen anyone." The second man stepped forward just a bit, his gaze narrowing. "You sure about that?" Ava held his stare, even though her pulse was racing. "Yeah, I just got home from work." For a moment, no one spoke. The first man studied her carefully, as if weighing her words. Then his eyes shifted, just slightly, toward the inside of the apartment. Ava's stomach twisted. Had he seen something? "Mind if we take a quick look?" he asked casually, though the question felt more like a command. Ava's grip on the door tightened. "Actually, I do mind," she said, her voice firmer now. "You can't just walk into my home." The air changed instantly. The second man's expression hardened. "Listen." "It's okay." The voice came from behind her. Ava's breath caught. "No." She turned sharply. Alexander was standing. Barely. One hand braced against the wall, the other pressed against his side where the wound still bled faintly through the bandage. He looked pale, weak, but his eyes were steady, cold, controlled. The room seemed to shift around him. "Alexander Kane," the first man said, his tone changing instantly, respect laced with something darker. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." Ava's heart dropped. They knew him. Of course they did. Alexander stepped forward slowly, each movement clearly costing him, but he didn't show it. "I told your boss. I'm not signing anything." The second man let out a quiet scoff. "You don't really have a choice anymore." Ava looked between them, confusion and fear crashing together. "What is going on?" she demanded. No one answered her. Alexander's gaze flicked to her briefly, something unreadable passing through his expression. "Stay out of this," he said quietly. Ava shook her head. "No, you brought this here. You don't get to shut me out now." For a moment, something softened in his eyes, but it vanished just as quickly. The first man took a step forward. "We're done talking." Everything happened fast. Too fast. The second man reached inside his jacket. Ava's breath caught a weapon. "Wait!" she shouted instinctively, stepping forward without thinking. "Ava, move!" Alexander snapped. But she didn't. She couldn't. Not when everything in her told her this was wrong. That this wasn't just about a rich man and his problems anymore. This was about right and wrong, about standing up, even when you're scared. The man raised the weapon. And suddenly, Alexander moved, faster than she expected. He grabbed Ava's arm and pulled her sharply to the side just as a loud bang echoed through the hallway. The sound exploded in her ears. Her vision blurred for a second as adrenaline surged through her body. "Run!" Alexander shouted. Ava didn't think. She ran down the narrow hallway, her heart racing, footsteps pounding behind her. She didn't even know where she was going. Just away from them, away from the danger that had just shattered her world. Behind her, she heard another shot, then another. "Alexander!" she cried out, turning instinctively. But a strong grip caught her wrist. "No," he said, his voice strained but firm as he caught up to her. "You don't look back." Blood stained his shirt more now. He was getting weaker. but he was still moving, still protecting her. "Why are they doing this?" she gasped as they reached the stairwell. "They want control," he said quickly. "Of my company, my name, everything." Ava's chest tightened. "So this is about money?" she said, disbelief in her voice. "It's never just about money," he replied. They pushed through the stairwell door, their footsteps echoing loudly as they descended. Voices shouted behind them. They were being followed. Ava's legs burned, her lungs screaming for air, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. Not now. Not when everything had changed. Not when helping a rich man, a stranger she didn't even know, had pulled her into a world she never asked for. As they reached the bottom, Alexander stumbled slightly. Ava caught him this time. "You're not okay," she said, panic creeping into her voice. "I'll be fine," he muttered, though it was clear he wasn't. She tightened her grip on him. "You better be," she said, "because I'm not done helping you yet." For the first time, a faint, almost disbelieving smile touched his lips. And in that moment, brief as it was, something shifted between them. Trust. Fragile. Dangerous. Real. But the sound of the door slamming open above them shattered it instantly. "They're still coming," Ava said. Alexander looked ahead, his expression hardening again. "Then we don't stop." They pushed forward into the night, into the unknown. 2 lives, 1 poor girl and 1 rich man, now tied together by a choice that could either save them or destroy them both. The night air hit Ava's lungs like ice as they burst out of the building and into the empty street. Rain still poured, soaking them within seconds, but neither of them slowed down. "Where are we going?" Ava shouted over the storm, her voice shaking with exhaustion. Alexander didn't answer immediately. His steps were unsteady now, his strength clearly fading. But his eyes scanned the street like a man who had lived his entire life anticipating danger. "There's a place," he finally said, his voice tight. "A safe house, a few blocks from here." Ava nodded, even though she wasn't sure she believed in anything safe anymore. Behind them, the door to the building slammed open. "They're out!" one of the men shouted. Ava's heart dropped. "They're faster than I thought," Alexander muttered. "Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. It gives me the strength and encouragement to keep writing beautiful stories." They turned down a narrow alley, their footsteps splashing through puddles. The walls closed in around them, the dim light barely cutting through the darkness. Ava's legs burned, her breath coming in sharp, uneven bursts. "You need to tell me everything," she said, her voice strained but determined. "Now!" Alexander glanced at her, then forward again. "My company, Kane Industries, it's worth billions," he said quickly. "But I found out something buried deep in the system. Illegal deals, weapons contracts, deals made under my name, but without my approval." Ava's eyes widened. "So someone is using your company?" "To build power," he finished. "And when I refused to sign off on it, they decided to remove me." Ava felt a chill run through her, colder than the rain. "So those men work for someone who wants me gone," he said. "Gone? As in dead?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander didn't answer. He didn't need to. They reached the end of the alley and turned onto a quieter street. Up ahead, an old, abandoned-looking building stood with boarded windows and a rusted gate. "That's it," Alexander said. Ava frowned. "That's your safe house?" "It's not what it looks like," he replied, They rushed toward it, Alexander pulling a small key from his pocket with shaking hands. He unlocked the gate and pushed it open, guiding Ava inside before quickly locking it behind them. The inside was dark, but different, clean, prepared, hidden. Lights flickered on as Alexander hit a switch, revealing a simple but secure space. Medical supplies, a couch, a small desk with a laptop. Ava stared. "You planned for this," she said. "I hoped I'd never need it," he replied. The moment the door was secured, Alexander's strength gave out. He collapsed. "Alexander!" Ava rushed to his side, catching him just before he hit the ground. "I'm fine," he muttered weakly, but his body said otherwise. "You're losing too much blood," she said, panic rising again. "Shoo, you need real help." He grabbed her wrist weakly. "No hospitals. Not yet." Ava shook her head, frustration breaking through. "You keep saying that, but you're dying." "I won't die," he said, forcing a faint smirk. "Not tonight." Ava stared at him for a moment, then let out a shaky breath. "Fine," she said. "But if you pass out again, I'm not listening to you anymore." She moved quickly, grabbing the proper medical supplies this time. Better than what she had at home. Cleaner, more professional. As she worked, her hands steadied. "Why me?" she asked suddenly. "Out of everyone. Why did I find you?" Alexander watched her, his gaze softer now despite the pain. "Because you didn't walk away," he said quietly. Ava paused for a second, then continued. "I almost did," she admitted. "But you didn't," he replied. Silence settled between them for a moment, broken only by the sound of rain hitting the roof. Then a loud crash echoed from outside. Ava froze. "No," she whispered. Alexander's expression hardened instantly. "They found us." Another crash. The gate. "They're breaking in," Ava said, panic surging again. Alexander pushed himself up despite the pain. "Help me up." "You can barely stand." "I don't have a choice." Ava hesitated, then helped him anyway. They moved toward the back of the room as the sound of metal snapping echoed through the building. Footsteps, closer, faster. Ava's heart pounded as fear threatened to take over, but something stronger pushed it back. She wasn't the same girl from earlier. Something had changed. "They're not taking you," she said, her voice trembling, but firm. Alexander looked at her, almost surprised. "Why?" he asked. "Why risk everything for me?" Ava met his gaze. "Because I know what it feels like to be left with nothing," she said. "And I won't be the person who walks away when it matters most." For a moment, everything else faded. The danger, the fear. It was just them. Then, the door burst open. The two men stormed in. "End of the line," one of them said coldly. Ava stepped slightly in front of Alexander. "Stay behind me," she whispered. He almost laughed. "That's my line." The men raised their weapons. Everything slowed. Ava's heart pounded. Her mind screamed, but she didn't move. And then, red and blue lights flashed through the broken windows. Sirens, loud, overwhelming. The men froze. "What?" one of them started. "Drop your weapons!" Voices shouted from outside. "Police." The men cursed under their breath, lowering their weapons slightly as officers flooded the building. Within seconds, they were restrained, forced to the ground. Ava stood there, stunned, her body finally catching up with everything that had just happened. She turned to Alexander. You said no police." Alexander looked at her, then toward the officers. "I didn't call them," he said. A voice came from the doorway. "I did." Ava turned. An older man in a suit stepped inside, calm, composed, powerful. "Mr. Kane," he said respectfully. Alexander nodded slightly. "Took you long enough, Victor." Ava blinked. "You knew they were coming?" Alexander looked at her. "I had suspicions," he said. "So I triggered a silent alert when we entered the safe house." Ava stared at him in disbelief. "So, all this was a risk," he admitted. "One that could have gone very wrong." Ava let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. The officers led the men away. The danger was over. Finally. The room fell quiet again. Ava looked around, then back at Alexander. "So, what happens now?" she asked. Alexander studied her for a moment. Then slowly he stood straighter. His presence, different now, stronger, commanding. "The truth comes out," he said. "The people behind this, they lose everything." He paused, then looked directly at her. "And you?" Ava raised an eyebrow. "Me?" A faint smile touched his lips. "You saved my life," he said. "A poor girl who helped a rich man, not knowing who he was." Ava shook her head slightly, almost in disbelief. "I just did what felt right." Alexander stepped closer. "Siunka, and that," he said quietly, "is exactly why I won't forget you." Days later, everything changed. The story broke across the news. Corruption exposed, powerful figures arrested, Kane Industries cleaned from the inside out. But Ava's life changed too. Not overnight, not magically, but steadily. A better job, a safer home, opportunities she never imagined. And through it all, Alexander never disappeared. He didn't just thank her, he stayed. Because sometimes, one choice, one moment, one act of kindness from a poor girl to a rich man can change everything. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. It gives me the strength and encouragement to keep writing beautiful stories. Thank you.